Welcome to Vision Pros, the show all about spatial computing, visionOS, and getting work done on the Apple Vision Pro. I'm Tim Chatton, host of the show. This episode of Vision Pros is sponsored by Agenda. Learn more at www.agenda.com.
My grandfather, who passed a couple years ago, watching him use a phone was really something. It was like a real empathy exercise because he just didn't have the dexterity. Using your eyes and then just kind of like pinching your fingers will extend the useful life of technology for so many people in so many ways. So I was super excited a lot by that for some weird reason. But my mind was racing. I just came out of that keynote with a ton of ideas.
Welcome back to another episode of Vision Pros. We are inching closer and closer to 2024 and the launch of the Apple Vision Pro. In this episode, we are joined by Clarko, who's fresh off his experience with the Apple Vision Pro at one of the many developer labs. As you can imagine, those labs are not for public discourse, but as you can tell by the runtime of this episode, that does not stop us from diving deep into the potential for visionOS and how we see spatial computing changing how we work. We also discuss at length his app, Symbolsaurus, that he is in the process of porting to visionOS. If you want to support this podcast, the best thing to do is go out and download Agenda, who is sponsoring this episode of Vision Pros. I'll be sharing a bit later in this episode all about the big multi-window update that hit earlier this year for both Mac and iPad, and this update will fit right at home on visionOS. But for now, head on over to agenda.com to learn more and get started with this awesome app that I've used for years at this point to produce my podcasts. Another way to support the show and get early access to both iPad Pros and Vision Pros is by supporting the Patreon at visionpros.fm/Patreon. Or you can subscribe in Apple Podcasts to either Vision Pros or iPad Pros, and you'll get early access to both. My great thanks to everyone that supports the show. With that, here's my interview with Clarko. Welcome to podcast, Clarko.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
It's exciting times in Apple Vision Pro land. We keep edging closer and closer to this inevitable release sometime early next year, according to Apple, as they reiterated recently.
Early. Who's to say?
Early, yes. Fingers crossed for February or even, January. What a world.
In my internal clock, I'm like putting it on April Fool's because I'm like, that's still early. And that's like a historically relevant date in Apple history. So let's shoot for that.
Yeah, why not? So, first, let's just dive a bit into your background as a developer and kind of Apple user in general before we dive into everything else, which there's a lot to chat about today.
Yeah, so I've been a Mac user and an interface designer for 20-some years now.
Okay.
Before that, I was a Windows kid. I was always interested in other operating systems, though, to the extent that I could get my hands on them. Because
it's always the fun thing as a kid, like I had a Windows kid as well. It's like you don't have any money. You can't really you can like ask, but it's like
we're building our own computers.
Right, exactly, yeah.
But I grew up on MS-DOS, and we had Acorn machines at school, and Acorn RISC machines are what became the ARM alliance. That's like a weird historical glitch, but I had buddies with an Amiga, and my auntie had an old Mac. And so Macs were just one of many computers I didn't have. And then I did an internship in an ad agency in 10th grade, and they were all using Macs. And when I started getting into web design and web development, that whole crowd was using Macs, and I started studying interactive multimedia, and that was all Macs. And so I just got to using them. And OS 9 was fine. It was crashy, and it had its interesting things about it, shall we say?
I only used it in retrospect after it was retired.
But this was around the time everyone was starting to upgrade to OS 10, and they were all a little nervous, but they were excited, particularly that it was more stable than OS 9. But also it was technically impressive, and it looked incredible. And so I ended up buying an eMac with my education discount, which is the cheapest thing you could possibly buy. And I was just kind of shocked by how nice it was, that it was software. It was software that was made with craft and care, and that whole it just works ethos of the Apple ecosystem. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to make nice tools for people who like nice tools.
Yeah.
So here I am.
Cool. Yeah,
I've
that was
been
the era.
lucky to work on a lot
you
of stuff.
Shift click on the minimize button to the slow genie animation. I think that's been yanked out at this point.
I haven't tried that in a long time.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised.
But I got into the era of Macs in 2006, so a little bit after the transition to Mac OS 10, but that was still the fun kind of era where everything was very playful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So interface designing, what kind of projects have you taken on, and what kind of different scopes have you dealt with for that?
I've been pretty lucky because I moved out to the United States when I was in my mid-20s. I grew up in Australia, despite the accent, and fell into startup land. And I've been able to work on like MLB at that, and I worked at Square and on Fitbit. And then I got to work on whole operating systems for smart appliances. I worked on the June oven and Weber grills. And nowadays I do a mix of freelance prototyping for different clients and building my own apps for Apple platforms. So I've always been that designer who was very much more on the technical end, who was contributing to the code base. And nowadays I get to kind of sit right in the middle with prototyping in the middle of design and development.
Very cool. And designing interfaces, how much into art and drawing and creating the art part of the design do you have to have in your tool set?
It's funny. It's like I said, I'm on the like technical end of that design spectrum. And when I first started working in Silicon Valley, I was working exclusively with designers who are on the art end of the spectrum. And so I always like envied them that they were so much better at that part of the job. And this was during those days when everything was fully skeuomorphic and they're like creating these incredible textures and doing the hand stitching on leather buttons. And I was like, I can't do that. But what I can do is like really great information architecture and like pick out these weird little bugs that are confusing to people. And I'm very good at documentation. So it's like, it's a totally different part of the job. But I have drawn my own icons my whole career, just not to the level of fidelity of like your Robert Andersons and your Louis Mantillas and your Bad Ellis's.
Yeah, the iOS 6 era was something else. Like I kind of miss that stuff.
It was.
Yeah. There was an iPad app that came out recently by the Halide guys that reminded me of that era. That does the it pulls up your iPad as a HDMI monitor. I'm going to pull up the name here real briefly because I forget.
It's called Orion, I think.
Orion, yeah. And
it's got like
Orion
a CRT
operating
emulation
system
mode
kind of thing to it. It's kind of just a very playful, fun app. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially for like something that does something relatively simple.
Yes.
Like letting yourself stand out that way is so cool.
Yeah. The great design thing I love, and you like drag your finger to unbox the app kind of thing. It's just skeuomorphic in a delightful way that I miss.
Yeah. And Sebastian, who heads up design over there, like he is of that same era. Like I know that he misses those days. So he's like throws it in as a little Easter egg whenever he can.
Yeah. So what's your current hardware setup these days? What Mac you rocking, iPad, all the good stuff?
I'm all over the place. So I have at my desk, I have an M1 iMac, which is purely because that's suited to being at a desk.
It's a perfect desk computer.
And I have an M1 MacBook Pro, the one with the touch bar. I bought it because it had the touch bar. I was like, I've never used it. I've got to use it before it disappears.
Yeah.
And a few months later, they introduced, the new model for M1 MacBook Pros without the touch bar and with the notch. And so I missed out on that. But I feel like I'm touching history. And iPad Pro is kind of my day-to-day workhorse. I use the iPad Pro in the Magic Keyboard so much because I use it for Swift prototyping, because it's just, you don't have to hit compile. You just type some text and then you can touch it on the screen immediately. It's so satisfying for prototyping. And with pencil, it's so satisfying for drawing. So it's really just my like sit on the couch and do some design work tool. And then just, a phone.
Excellent. Yeah, we will need to have a different conversation all about iPad usage someday for iPad Pros. that sounds awesome. And do you own any headsets of any kind? Currently, they're mostly just for gaming, but I'm curious.
I do. I got onto the Quest 2 in a big way during those early months of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
And the price point obviously makes it really accessible. It's, less than a tenth of the cost of a Vision Pro at retail.
Yes.
Even though they are upping the price for the next generation, which they just announced. But
yeah, $500, which is still very reasonable. I think $550 was what the PSVR 2 was that I just got. Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot. And it's, it's kind of like Nintendo Switch, where it's like you're not playing it for the graphics fidelity, you're playing it for the fun.
Yeah.
And so you forgive it its foibles.
Yes.
But once I explored the catalog and played all the games that I felt like I wanted to play, it didn't have any everyday utility for me. Like, I tried the web browsers and I tried some of those other tools, and it's like the screens and the lens artifacting, it's not pleasant to use for text or normal 2D video. Right. And navigating with the wands or the controllers, it feels like you're using a laser pointer. It's very wobbly.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to see a port of some of those titles for other platforms. I have been looking at the PSVR 2 because one of my favorite games called Moss, which is a little adventure where you're a mouse.
Yes, so good.
So cool. So I'd love to see ports of all of those titles, but I'm not counting on it.
Right.
Apple's reputation with game devs has always been kind of so-so.
Yeah, the future of Apple Vision Pro with gaming is just going to be a curious one, because the hand tracking is everything right now, and you can use a 2D flat game controller, which great for 2D games, flat games.
Mm-hmm.
But PSVR 2, it's ground up VR gaming, and I think that's probably where I will continue to play my VR games, because it has more horsepower, I think, GPU wise, and all that stuff, being a big, huge box dedicated to gaming versus Apple Vision Pro on an M2 chip. And that could change in the future, but until they figure out the controllers, because I do feel like haptics in your hands and actual buttons are useful in video games. I mean, as we'll talk about, they're not going to be totally useful if you're trying to use it as a computer, but for gaming, totally useful. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do wonder about this whole metal migration kit that they announced this year, and some of the carrots they're dangling for game devs, because even if you can't use the spatial controllers from a VR headset, it would be nice to just bring in some classic flat screen games, pick up your PS5 controller with its incredible haptics and play in the headset on a far bigger screen than you could have in the home otherwise.
Yeah, and there are some solid VR games that use traditional controllers. PSVR 1 had a ton of those because the Move era wasn't great with that, so there was a lot of games that did just use the regular ones, and Super Hypercube was great. Tetris Effect Connected uses the PSVR 2 controllers, but it's also very enjoyable with just a regular controller. Some games just work very well in that way, and you're still immersed in that world where you can kind of zone out in Tetris, and it's great.
Yeah. Tetris Effect kind of just works on every platform. It's great.
Yes, that is just it's Apple says there's this whole meditation thing. That's my meditation in PlayStation VR. I'll just load it up. It's delightful. But the Quest 2, I could imagine. Yeah, web browser would just be miserable there. You even mentioned 2D video, which I find quite enjoyable in PSVR 2. It's 2K per eye, so I know Apple Vision Pro will be double that and just blow this out of the water. But it is a much different experience holding an iPad a couple inches, foot from your face, versus wearing PlayStation VR 2 and watching, Foundation on that. It's like I got a projector in my house, like a movie theater in my house.
That's cool.
That's great. So I am looking forward to Apple Vision Pro, where I can have that experience not at my desk downstairs with my PS5, but in my comfy chair in my bedroom. Yeah. So as far as Apple Vision Pro, when you saw this announced, you've had this experience with Oculus or Quest 2, sorry. Prior.
I still call it Oculus.
Right, yes. What was your first reaction? Because going into this event, I was like, I'm VR's for gaming. I don't really care what Apple's doing. And then I saw their reveals, like, oh, this is for everything else. This is a computer. What was your initial thoughts here?
I was very excited because I'm not a serious gamer. I have a Switch, and a PS5 was a very recent addition to the household. But the rumor mill had been reporting on hardware all year, and they'd kind of done it to death. Yeah. And so the OS reveal was like this huge surprise. It was just, wonderful to see thinking about things that you didn't know what you'd get from the hardware rumors. Because pass-through cameras on by default is really novel. The windowed interface, which is clearly designed for multitasking, is really nothing like what we expected from other headsets. And this whole bit about driving the interface with your eyes, with your hands in your lap or standing, that really struck me as way better ergonomically than hunched over a desk. And for someone who, I'm watching relatives get older, and, as they, my grandfather who passed a couple of years ago, watching him use a phone was really something. It was like a real empathy exercise because he just didn't have the dexterity of a younger person. Yeah. And so I just feel like using your eyes and then just kind of like pinching your fingers will extend the useful life of technology for so many people in so many ways. So I was super excited a lot by that for some weird reason. But my mind was racing. Yeah. I just came out of that keynote with a ton of ideas.
Yeah. No, I'm super excited to use it. We have a newborn in the house, a 1-year-old now. And she does a lot of sleeping at night on me before we put her down to the crib. And it's nearly impossible to use an iPad as a computer and that setup with her on my chest and stuff, like it as a laptop or whatever. And holding the iPad's okay, but I got to make sure I'm not getting too tired and, no dropping the iPad kind of thing. And just throwing these on and being able to have this full computing environment where I can have my hands separated and kind of like use the interface in different kind of situations seem like an obvious win, especially with the amount of screen real estate you have access to here.
Yeah, it's I have a 2-year-old dog, which is a totally different ballgame, but he's very demanding and doesn't like it when I'm using an iPad in front of him. And so I'm just very curious how he'll react to headset daddy and just, I'll still pet you, but I'm not looking at you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you could actually be petting the dog as you're like pinching and stuff, I would imagine. That should,
yeah. I mean, so long as you're not petting in a way that it looks like you're pinching, just keep one hand free.
Yeah. So you're the very first guest I've had on that has been to the Apple Vision Pro labs. I was going to say the first person that's used it, but that's not true. Chance Miller did the press experience. So he had 30 minutes. You had a good 5 to 8 hours from what I've heard online of people going to these. It's a very full day. That's what I've heard. Yeah. So before we get to all of what you can say, which is probably not a ton or anything from that experience, spatial computing in general, 20 years from now as technology improves, is this going to, in your mind, replace for most people desktop computing, phones? Like, what's your aspirations for spatial computing and visionOS in general?
I mean, 20 years is a really long time.
I figure, 2 decades, that seems like a sufficient time for technology to miniaturize, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But if you had asked me 20 years ago if I thought cell phones were the future, and I had a Sony Ericsson T68i in my hand, I would have been skeptical. But I don't know. This feels like a huge leap in computing interfaces, and especially in like work computing interfaces. And there are a lot of kinds of work. Because I guess like starting next year, there'll be enthusiasts like us who will tolerate the size and the weight and the battery life, and we'll remote desktop into our Mac, and we'll run our iPads in compatibility mode. And like this all feels very much like the early days of OS X, where we're all just kind of like duct taping together our old computing lives onto our new computing life.
Yes.
And we'll tolerate the sharp edges because that's what enthusiasts do.
Yeah.
But then after us, there are industries full of people who will benefit from spatial computing in real and interesting ways, that they're using 3D software all day today, but they do it on a 2D screen, and they can only talk about their work in 2D terms, even though it's 3D work. Like interior designers, industrial designers, architects, jewelers, mechanical engineers. And it's like weird. I've worked with a lot of these people in my career, and reviewing their work product is actually kind of difficult.
Yeah, I remember in high school or even middle school, we used like CAD software on these Windows computers, and we're working on these 3D like projects. I can only imagine that space just blowing up with this.
Yeah, I think they'll be on board quicker than most, although it depends a lot on the tools.
Right. Yeah, the software. I wonder, like Finale never, a music notation software, Finale never made the jump to iPad or iOS or any of that stuff. We have new companies that have taken that mantle, and I wonder in the CAD world, will the old hats make that migration, or will it take a new company to be the ones to do it?
Yeah, even if the old companies do just output compatible files, I think that will be a big change in workflow.
Yeah.
Because if they can export USDZ and then you can just email someone a USDZ file and let them review it, because so much of that job is going into meetings where you look at like side renders of a 3D object and you're like, okay, yeah, that's okay. And then you give feedback and then it goes through another round. And then once it reaches a point of maturity in the design process, they start to do physical prototypes.
Yeah.
And those are expensive and time consuming. And even if it's just cardboard packaging, which like I've worked on a ton of cardboard packaging in my career, and it's like, that's a lot of work to go to the art store and buy some artboard and get out your bone folder and like produce a fake box just so an executive can look at a fake box.
Yes.
And if you could just do that at 1-to-1 scale in a headset, it would be such a time saving.
Yeah, and you could have like the object that you're going to be packaging with it in real life kind of like next to it, and like that could be fun. And
like useful. If it's on a table in front of you.
Right.
Yeah. And that's one niche, and we're a different niche. But putting my startup hat on, like spatial computers could become like standard issue gear in new offices. I don't think anyone's about to like retrofit their old office because it's a lot of expense. But office space and office furniture are really expensive, like horribly expensive, because the whole Silicon Valley starter kit of like motorized desk and dual monitors and split keyboards and all this stuff and ergonomic chairs. It's like, what if you just didn't buy those? What if you had like a comfy chair and a cubby where you can put your stuff and store your headset when you're not using it?
Yeah.
It's just this is a horrible thing to think of, but like they've been pushing for less space per employee for so long in every industry. Yeah. And if everybody didn't need a desk, they would like jump up and down about the square footage that they're no longer paying for. And if working from home and working from the road were just as productive as working from the office, also a huge gain. So I don't know, this adoption curve in industry seems like it could be really weird. And that's not Apple's usual thing.
Yeah.
So this is a really expensive consumer product, but like the business spending analysis is, I don't know how to make that.
Yeah, and designing office space around headsets is a weird one because like you benefit from wide open spaces in spatial computing, not these little tiny cubbies that have been cramming people in. And another thing to consider is this huge, if you have a huge wide open space, like a big table everyone's kind of working around, you have all the people using the same space virtually in a way that's just kind of interesting. Like everyone's looking at different things in the same virtual space. And then you'll be able to enter total VR mode if you want to isolate from the other people around you. Maybe throw on AirPods Pro with noise cancellation to try to really, like, I'm not paying attention to anything else but this right now. And so you kind of get benefits of being in your own office, sorta, without needing that. Yeah.
I mean, in the open floor plan offices that became trendy 10, 15 years ago.
Everyone hated.
Yep. And I went straight to noise canceling headphones unless I was in a mode of work where I wanted to overhear stuff.
Right.
Which is like what is interesting about office work, that it's, that it is inherently social if you're not trying to get work done.
Yes. You can waste 8 hours very easily with the social stuff if you want to. It's like I had a very productive day of working with my
coworkers, but my projects didn't really move forward today, did they? No.
It's networking. It's meetings.
Yeah.
It's,
As I'll reference John Gruber's The Talk Show. He called it Pleading the Fifth with Michael Simmons of FlexiVids.
Mm-hmm.
He also went to the lab as well. So basically, I believe the only things you'll be able to really chat about are things that are publicly known, like from the press demo. So so whatever you feel comfortable sharing, I will have questions, and some of them we'll just have to skip right by, depending on how we feel it goes here.
Yeah. Honestly, being that I'm like putting on my designer hat, there isn't that much about visionOS that isn't public, because that keynote was a big software demo. They're showing it off. They're trying to get people hyped for it. So they put it all out there, and then they have the interface guidelines that they publish, and they have all these videos from DubDub that are part of those interface guidelines, and they really go in depth about the design of the user interface. And so there's a ton of things we don't know about the hardware. There's tons of things we don't know about the OS from a technical level, but like the UI is out there. We have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but WWDR is very clear that we shouldn't share details about the labs because it's not a press demo.
No,
and I'm not a journalist,
right?
So I will couch things in terms of everything I've said publicly. But full disclosure, I'm friends with a lot of Apple people. I married one of them, but I'm here as a UI designer. Like, I've poured over these videos, and so not here as a spy. I'm just here to share enthusiasm because I'm excited about working on it.
Yeah. So I guess I should start by asking, is there anything at all you can share about the physical experience of using this thing? Comfortability, expectations, were they met? Anything at all in the physical realm? This is probably the one realm that's probably the hardest to walk around.
Yeah. I think because they told the press even in those first few demos that they were still working on the light seal or something, or they didn't have all the light seals available.
They're still making more of those. Yeah. Different
so
models.
There's a ton of that stuff where I'm just like, well, I got what I got, and it was, I don't know if it was my size. I have absolutely no insight into whether it was correct, and I don't have corrective lenses, so I don't. I don't know how representative the experience is to what will ship.
Yeah.
Because in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, the hardware seems done, but if they say all these accessories aren't finished, then is that what the shipping deadline is all about? Are they because hardware has pretty long lead times. You can't just turn that all around super quick.
Yeah, is the OS the thing that needs polishing, or the hardware, or a little bit of both? Probably a little bit of both, yeah.
I'll say it right off the bat. My expectations were really high because of what they showed in the keynote. And my expectations have stayed high.
And what the press has been saying as well. Yeah, all the press, not a single press was like, this wasn't good. Everyone was like, oh, this blew me away. Yeah.
Yeah. It's technologically, just on paper, is so impressive. And then everything we've seen for the functionality and the visuals, also super impressive. And so I am impressed. Oh, there are parts of it that just really fascinate me. And this is, I can't not be a full-time designer. It's just, what I've been doing for my whole life. But the relationship between your eyes and your gaze and the user interface is really fascinating. Everybody knows that your eyes are the pointing device in this thing. But that's actually a really big deal.
It's interesting. Conceptually, you can say that, and until you actually use it, it's like, oh, that's what that is. Yeah.
Well, it upends so much conventional wisdom about user interface design, because every computer I've ever used, the cursor is controlled by your hand. And I was talking about the Quest 2, where it feels like a laser pointer, because you're holding this cursor and then you're pointing it at something that's 30 feet away.
Right.
And how when you hold a laser pointer, it's very wiggly when you point it against the opposite wall. That feels weird in Quest. And, otherwise you're using keyboards and mice and styluses or just your bare finger. You look at the screen and you see something you want to click, and then you move the pointer manually with your hand to click the thing.
Yeah.
And with visionOS, because your eyes are the pointer and the screen is everywhere, now you just look, and that's it. There are no gross movements. You can just look at something and click, and that is revolutionary. And it's I know that it's also a cool gimmick, but it changes everything about how you would design user interfaces, because something that they really nailed into us for some reason at school was Fitts law, which is an equation that quantifies essentially how hard it is to point at stuff. It's you take relative measurements of size and distance and time, and it's just okay, things that are big and close are easier to hit than things that are far and small. And that applies whether you're throwing a baseball at a barn, or whether you're shooting at a target, or whether you're using a mouse. And that just seems like it's completely abstracted away in this model of eye tracking, because if you can see it, you have hit it. It's the effort just seems built in to our eyes. We don't think about looking at something as a challenge.
Right. Discoverability. iOS has had the challenge for a while of, is this tappable? Does a long press do anything? Does this get even harder as a designer to design an app to tell a user this thing you're looking at is tappable? Or tap's the word we use when we tap our fingers together. Is that the right nomenclature?
Yeah, that's the official terminology.
Okay,
I keep thinking of click when I turn in terms of mice and stuff, but yes, tapping is the official terminology.
Yeah, but designing an app around does the OS convey what is tappable as you're looking, kind of like Apple TV does with its little shimmer effect on everything you look at, or how's that?
I mean, they talk about that. They talk about that at length in the keynote. It's a conceptual leap. There is this argument on software teams about buttons and links looking clickable enough. Because otherwise, how will the customer know that they should click it?
Right.
Because sometimes there's text and icon on screen for no reason at all, and you shouldn't click those, but you should click the buy button.
Yes.
And because visionOS has that highlight effect where it puts a bit of shimmer on it and a shape around it. If it's just text, it'll put a shape around it or an icon. So when your eyes land on something, it gets that highlight effect. And like I was saying, your eyes are the pointer. You're never not looking at something. So every time you look at something, instantly, can you tap on it or not? There's absolutely no question.
Yeah.
And that really feels like it changes the job of the designer, because you're not arguing about whether this should be more red or bolder, or whether it should have a different shaped border around it because you're trying to attract attention. It's just, or the age-old web design argument about should a link be underlined or not. And it's the affordance of tappability is just built in here. You can't not have it. And it makes button design, not that button design is a specialty, but it makes the idea of button design just kind of moot. And I get the impression that a lot of iPad ports or iPad apps running in compatibility mode will be kind of over the top looking, because all the visionOS apps that we've seen, they look very kind of austere. They're very sparing with color and button shapes and stuff. And all these iPad apps with huge blue rectangles in them will just look kind of like a clown show, unless everybody goes the far opposite direction and all apps start looking like Vegas slot machines. It could go either way.
Yeah. Does the size of the button, do you think that'll larger buttons kind of help the user point their eyes that direction to, this is one of the primary buttons to be looking at while I'm using this app? I'd imagine size would be a factor in designing these apps now.
I mean, there's definitely a matter of trying to catch your attention in the periphery that is always the case. And it's funny, there's also the concern for people designing visionOS apps is screenshots. Yes. Because screenshots do not respond to your gaze, nor do demo videos. So it's your app could look very boring in a screenshot, but be totally fine in real life because the buttons always light up when you look at them.
Yeah.
So there's a real balancing act there. There is a whole thing about button sizing in visionOS that I can talk about.
Yeah.
They talk about it in the design guidelines that you need buttons to be like a hit target of 60 points.
Okay.
And relative to, and points is a totally arbitrary metric.
60 points sounds tiny to me because I'm used to podcast artwork is whatever 1,000, but it's like
yeah. Well, in the first days of iOS, a point was a pixel. There was just a one. We would just call them pixels. We didn't call them points. Then when things went to Retina, we had to add this level of abstraction. So it's like, it's no longer a pixel, it's a point. It represents a 2x2 pixel square in old fashioned terms.
Right.
Now we're talking about a UI that is not even measured in pixels. It's measured in degrees of field of view. And so I don't know what the conversion is specifically of degrees to points, but when they say it needs to be 60 points, they're doing that because they need that for hit targeting.
Right. And the windows will dynamically change depending if you put it to default focal distance versus trying to bring it closer or further away. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because on an iPhone, the recommended hit target size is 44 points. That's like the smallest button they think you can get away with. But that's not an aesthetic decision. That is a reality of firmware engineering. Because when you're working with touch panels, they have this capacitive grid, and they do a bunch of heuristics in code to just take this sloppy analog input from a touch panel and turn it into an event for the UI software. And that's, the joys of firmware engineering. That's just you're dealing with garbage input and you're trying to make useful output in it. But in visionOS, they're doing that with an infrared camera and ML models that track your eye movements. And so it's just a fundamentally different technology with totally different constraints. And so they just obviously did a ton of testing, and they're just like, all right, within our margin of error, 60 points is what we can say is reliable for a button to look at. And it really makes me wonder about future generations of IR cameras. I don't know if that's a field that gets a lot of advancement in it year over year, but like future generations of camera, future ML models, obviously that is a field that gets a ton of investment in it year over year. Could you radically improve eye tracking? And when you do, what do you do with that improvement? Like, do you just make all the windows a little smaller? Do you change the distance multiplier on that dynamic scale you were talking about, where when you drag your window closer and further, that it gets bigger and smaller? Or do you do something entirely new that I can't even imagine?
Right. Yeah, it's curious. The eye tracking stuff, it's in PSVR 2, and it's great for games. So I really hope one day Apple adds an API for game developers to enable that as a control mechanism, which currently is not allowed for privacy reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious about, I'm not sure if this has been publicly shared, is so right now on iPadOS, when I have my cursor up and I'm hovering over text, my cursor transforms into a thing that lets me select the text and edit it, highlight it. In visionOS, as you're looking at text that is text you've typed into the interface, is there any notion of this way of highlighting this text, or is that reserved for perhaps if you bring in an external mouse or trackpad that at that point it would do this kind of behavior?
That is a good question, and something I can't answer out of ignorance, not because of... but they did talk in one of the videos, maybe it was State of the Union, about this, taking your cursor and doing a bit of a pinch gesture on it to make it a precision cursor for drawing.
Yeah.
And they were demoing that in Freeform. They're their kind of whiteboard everything app. And so there was an element to that. But it's also interesting that in iPadOS, I think that text selection thing in general is really limited to editable text,
right?
With the exception of web pages.
Yeah,
and
Safari gets it all
the distinction there, because I work in SwiftUI.
Screenshots, I think gets it as well. I'm pretty sure if I open photos and there's text on a screenshot, it'll do it. But because I work almost exclusively in SwiftUI, and SwiftUI has this modifier that you can put on text to say that it's selectable. And when you do that on Mac, you get exactly what you're expecting, where you can just select character by character. Yeah.
You do that on iOS, it's just a long press with the copy button.
Yes.
You don't get that cursor text selection behavior when you're doing it in SwiftUI. And to my knowledge, the primary user interface development technology for visionOS is SwiftUI. There's definitely compatibility shims in there for bringing over iPad stuff, but I'm not 100% sure that you're allowed to just write UIKit or AppKit software directly to visionOS.
Another thing I'm curious if they've shared yet is, so audio on iPadOS can be frustrating at times where it's just a single app that has full audio control, and if you start something else, it takes over. Have they shared in the spatial computing environment if multiple apps could have audio, and maybe even those apps would be positionally sending the audio to you so you'd be able to hear where the app's coming from almost?
There are several dub sessions about spatial audio, and I have not watched them because it's not something that is part of my day-to-day work.
Right.
So there's definitely spatial positioning of audio, and I know Steve Troughton-Smith has talked a bit about this in relation to
Broadcast,
his radio app, Broadcast.
Yeah.
And I couldn't answer it for you. But I think somewhere between the dub sessions and Steve's toots, there's an answer there.
Yeah. I'm super curious. It feels, a lot of people have said iPadOS is the father of visionOS. Do the OSs feel related, or it seems like visionOS has many more windows you're working with, this whole new interface? How close do these feel to you?
You can see just from the visual design of the apps, the Messages app and the Freeform app and all the apps that they have in visionOS look very, very much like their iPad counterparts.
Yeah.
And that's not by accident.
Right.
And the multitasking that also fascinates me about visionOS feels like iPad Stage Manager, but with so much more screen real estate that you're not constantly being kicked.
Yeah, you have unlimited
by Windows
by all regards.
Yeah. Because macOS multitasking, you have one foreground window, and you've got your dock and you've got your menu bar and you've got your app switcher. All these things are built around this idea that there has to be one foreground app because it controls the menu bar, and there has to be one foreground window,
and it controls the keyboard shortcuts as well.
Input. Yeah, and iPadOS has that to an extent. It has keyboard focus if you have a hardware keyboard.
Yeah, when it works.
Because
sometimes the keyboard focus is why is this keyboard working in the other app?
Yeah, not my favorite aspect of iPadOS, but I understand that I'm also in a minority of people who use it with a hardware keyboard all day, every day. But if you're just, I have a workspace on my iPad, which is my social media workspace, and I have Instagram and Mastodon and Threads all side by side because two of those are just iPhone apps. Right. They have to be very narrow windows.
Yeah.
So I just throw a third one in there and make it a narrow window. I can have them all perfectly side by side.
Yeah.
And you can just interact with them all. You're not bringing one forward. You're just touching what you need to touch. And the multitasking is just invisible.
Yeah, because in visionOS, so in Mac, it's been a while since I've actually used them. Things go gray for the inactive app, right? So in visionOS, as you're looking at things, that becomes the primary app just by your look. I'd imagine if you look at an app, that's where the keyboard focus would go if you're using an external keyboard. And as you change where you're looking, if you start a click and drag with an external keyboard or mouse, and then you look at a different window, you'll be able to pull it into that app. It feels like it should be pretty seamless with that stuff.
Yeah, and it feels like it should just be iPadOS. To your point, iPadOS seems like the it's weird to call it the dad because it's this smaller.
You're right,
but
less powerful.
The progenitor. Because Alexander McGinnis talked about this at length in the keynote, and they had all that B-roll of people doing multitasking, and there's that guy at the desk with 3 or 4 apps all around him, and none of them is dim.
Yeah,
none of them is
that's a good point.
None of them is noticeably background.
Right.
And with our experience with iPadOS, it's all right, I can just scroll this window, I can just scroll this window, I can tap this button, and it's nothing ever jumps to the foreground. And in one part of the keynote, the guy drags a a 3D model out of a messages thread and drops it on the table in front of him. Yeah. And that's a new window. That's a volumetric window instead of just being a 2D window. And nothing else happened. None of the other windows reacted to like suddenly not being the focus of his input. So it really does seem like it's based on iPadOS for that reason.
Right. Apple recently updated iWork with USD support. Is this just visionOS prepping in your mind?
I'm not sure. I mean, we've had USDZ support in Safari for a really long time.
Yeah.
And they've had this AR quick look built into iOS for a really long time. So it just seems like something that the OS is capable of. It's reliably capable of it, going back several versions. So if you need to add support to it for your app and your app supports older OSs, then go for it. Yeah. But I've certainly been intrigued by the idea of just like including USDZ as a media type in normal apps. Like, could Instagram let you upload USDZ files and you just like scrolling through a feed of 3D objects? That'd be great. But I don't know what effort is required to do that.
Yeah.
And if you're a multi-platform app, obviously there are limits on what you can do. Like if you are Instagram, you have to build the USDZ viewer for the web and for Android and for every platform that you ship on.
Yeah, USDZ will be, with visionOS, I think just the apps that create those on visionOS should be just a lot of fun to play around with and build stuff. That I wonder if the 3D printing machine market will just kind of get bigger along with visionOS as people create stuff they want to print.
Yeah, there are certainly like VR apps like is it called Light Sculpt? Like there are sculpting apps in VR that feel like they would do even better if you had, if you're using hand tracking instead of controllers. Cool. You
start with like a block of ice or whatever it is, and you have hand tracking, and that could be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah. And then I'm speaking out of turn for USDZ, but I get the impression that you can either create objects that you look at from the outside, or you can create like shells that you stand inside and look out at. I don't know if that's how they make their environments on visionOS, but like it would be great to just be sent a little file and you open it and then you're standing in a place. You're standing in a new environment.
Right.
Like that would honestly, like being able to visit anywhere or places that never existed or places that no longer exist, or just, meditate by a stream that would be a 3-hour drive from where you are.
Yeah.
Would be wonderful.
Yeah. It would be super cool. So iPhone 15 Pro captures spatial video. It'd be cool if there was a mode to like, I hike to the top of one of my favorite mountains to hike, and I capture whatever kind of, maybe an app guides me through a capture process, an Apple app to capture a scene. And I can just capture this whatever scene, almost like panoramic, but like a video version.
Yeah, like a spherical pano.
Yeah, and I can then use that in Apple Vision Pro for future workspaces. Like that should be a mode in the future to be able to do that kind of capture.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever used WebXR formats on any of your other headsets. It's stereoscopic video, but it's very jarring because you don't control where you look.
Oh,
So everything is 3D, but the director is very much in charge. So I tried doing some roller coasters and some rides at Disneyland that I've never been on because I haven't been back there in years. Yeah. And it's really difficult because you're not in charge of anything. Yeah.
The gestures. Apple Watch, it took them many years to figure out what the side button should do and all this kind of stuff. From what you've seen with the gestures that they've, shown off to the public, does it seem like a natural way to interact with everything? Are they missing key things that, they should add some future gestures to what the slot is? And
they seem to me like they've been very conservative, which is fair for an Apple 1.0 product. You are conservative because you can't wait to see what we do with it, is the phrase.
Yeah, iPhone OS or iPhone firmware 1 or whatever did not have copy and paste. It took them a while to figure out a lot of stuff. It had the magnifier glass, I think, to change your text position back then, but
yes. Yeah. And so what are their published gestures? They have pinch, obviously, and they have tap.
Yeah.
Tap. They have tap. And then they have pinch, pinch and unpinch, the zooming in and out gestures that they show when you're using photos. And a few others, but it seems like a really limited set. And I have to assume more will come. But I also assume that since they've given developers such deep access to the hand tracking APIs, that they're waiting to see if developers dive in there and invent stuff, because they've done that with the advanced gestures on iPadOS. They didn't give us any really interesting gestures like undo and redo on iPadOS for years, so many years. Besides shake, which you never want to do with an iPad.
Yeah, it still works on iPad Pro. 13-inch iPad Pro, we could shake to undo, and I occasionally look very silly doing that. Scroll.
So I feel like they waited.
Yeah.
I feel like they waited for a certain class of app, especially drawing apps, where you have your hands are busy and you are not shaking the thing.
Yes.
And you are doing a lot of undoing and undoing. I think they let the market invent a lot there, and then they're just like, okay, let's standardize this now.
Yeah, and they took
let people just ride the standard.
Was it scroll to refresh? I'm not sure what the
pull to refresh.
Yeah.
And I get the feeling they're going to do a lot of that here, assuming that there are a good body of developers inventing interesting gestures. Because, the list of gestures they have.
There is a capacity for developers to include their own custom gestures that are not system-wide. Is that a feature of the OS?
The hand tracking APIs are extensive.
That's exciting to hear. Yeah, that's awesome.
I don't know how hard it is to work with.
Right.
But certainly if you're someone like the VR sculpture apps and your whole user interface is using your hands, you're going to dive deep into that to see what you can do.
Create a little blowtorch with your, grab the.
But of the published gestures they have, there's no undo gesture, which I obviously desperately want on every single platform that I use, because I always need to undo the stupid thing I just did.
Yeah.
And those I assume will come, but they're just being conservative out of the gate.
And I wonder how deep the hand gesture API is. Like, could a developer, I don't know, you sell this little like a hardware thing that's like a fake sword or something that's like for games.
I think we need that for Beat Saber and for
right?
Vader Immortal Lightsaber Dojo.
Yeah, just something to hold. It doesn't even have to
empty hands.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be Bluetooth. Just something just to hold. I wonder if it could work with that kind of stuff.
Little hilt.
Yeah. Any other just general thoughts about visionOS before we move on to your app in particular?
Yeah, we started talking about expectations in the beginning.
Yeah,
and it's funny because Apple is all about managing expectations. They have that reputation for shipping something small and focused and polished and then iterating. But they sell that thing. Like they show you what they made and then they sell it to you. And so what they showed at DubDub isn't just a fantasy. It's not concept art. It's it's a real product.
Right.
But they only showed it seemingly in office and home entertainment workloads.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot outside of that. And I'm going to call sitting in a plane seat a home entertainment situation.
Yeah. I desperately hope this device operates on like a porch outside in the backyard. Like,
me too.
But we've not seen that.
But they're really right. So they're setting that expectation, and you have to assume, because of how good they are at this job, that they're doing it on purpose. Like it's a Mac for your face.
Yes.
And it's silly. After the keynote, the very first thing I imagined it for was rally driving, and I'm not a race car driver. I don't know why that jumped to mind, but like rallying, for anyone who doesn't know, is a motorsport where you're racing on urban or off-road courses, and it's a driver and a navigator, because the courses are very complicated. You need a navigator who's sitting there looking at the map and then making hand gestures like, turn right in 200 feet.
Yeah.
Something to that effect, which is the opposite of office work. But I thought, coming right out of the keynote, like, hey, take the navigator out of the car. Give the driver a cool AR heads-up display and save 200 pounds of weight and like go faster and win a race. Right. Maybe that's against the rules. I have no idea.
Yeah.
like I said, I'm not a race driver. But Apple never showed anyone in a car. It's probably not safe.
It's disabled, I think, in the API thing we see. Yeah, you can't be moving.
So I just jumped to that assumption that it'd be possible. And then Mike Rockwell said at the talk show in San Jose how hard it was to make it work on a plane, because of the IMU, the inertial measurement unit that like tracks the gyro and accelerometers and stuff to determine how much you are moving in space. Yeah. And if you're on a plane, you're always moving in space.
Yes.
So they're doing some kind of inertial compensation there that's obviously very complicated.
And there's like a plane mode I think you are supposed to put it in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have no idea if plane mode works on a bus.
Right.
But, there's a lot of Apple employees who are riding a bus to work every day.
It's true.
And they probably want this product. And like you said, like, can you do it in your back deck? Is direct sunlight even okay? Because like I played Lightsaber Dojo in the backyard with Quest 2, and the tracking was all off. It was, I had to stop very quickly. So expectations are high. Like, it's obviously a very, very polished, like very mature looking product, but expectations are also very narrow. We're talking, like, it really seems like you want to be standing or sitting indoors. Right. And we don't know where the edges are of this product yet, which is very frustrating as people who are trying to invent new things for it, because they're obviously really proud of it as a work tool and as an entertainment platform. But we all see potential for it in mobile computing, or like mobile spatial computing.
Yes.
But we don't even know if it is mobile. We know that it has 2 hours of battery life, and that's all we know. We don't even know if it has cellular or GPS.
Yeah, I'd imagine cellular or not, they probably would have shared that tidbit. Or maybe, who knows, maybe that comes in the January reveal and they reveal all of the specs and they've just shared a little bit for now. Who knows?
Yeah. And I guess we don't even have cellular Macs yet, so
we
that seems like maybe a leap.
It might be sad to say, but I kind of expect this to get cellular before the Macs do.
So yeah, like I'm really excited and really impressed by this whole product, but I'm also trying to ground myself in reality, which is like when we talk about my app, it's going to be silly because that is the most grounded in reality. Yes. It is not like a groundbreaking, outlandish app. It's a normal office productivity app.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to rein in my enthusiasm to stay within the bounds of what they actually showed, because what they showed is cool and I'm excited about it. But man, just the mind just races at possibilities that we don't even know if they're possible.
Yeah, definitely. Did you end up getting a 15 Pro to start gathering spatial videos of your 2-year-old pup?
Not yet. Part of me is concerned about coordinating the replacement of cables in our lives.
Yes.
The car in particular, we use wired CarPlay, and that's Lightning. Yeah. So it feels like we'll need to coordinate that change between me and my wife. I'm on the replacement plan thing, and part of me is also juggling this load of old devices that I have to keep around for software testing. So I'm like mentally wondering what version of the OS each device gets upgraded to as its last hurrah.
Yes.
And so my newest testing device is a 13 mini, which I love and miss.
Oh, yes.
And so
I hope they
that'll
make a
probably
16 mini next year. Let's bring it back.
Yeah. So like that'll probably take us to iOS 20. That's not a number I expect to say out loud.
Right. Yeah.
But like, so the 13 mini will probably get iOS 20. And now I have a 14 Pro. So should I just skip a year and like then manage all these operating system releases?
Yeah.
It's such weird calculus to do as a developer. Like, what hardware do you keep around? And when does it have to be retired because it's not getting updates anymore?
Yeah, it's interesting that being a software developer, like it must be so much more painful that phones have gone up and up in price versus like $600 for original iPhone. That's extravagant, Yeah. But
Although then again, like going from having to build my own PCs as a kid to like being able to just buy a super great laptop. And it's like, comparatively speaking, the laptops are cheaper.
Yeah. Is spatial video capture something you're excited for with the headset when you get it? Is that something? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, like for the dog reasons.
Yes.
Such a...
I know, right? Yeah.
Okay.
I'm excited to capture my cat, my daughter, and her dog. Yeah.
Yeah. I am so intrigued by it. And I think the iPhone 15 and future generations of iPhone are certainly the right device to be capturing that on every day.
Yes. It will be nice, I think, for some captures to be on the headset, so your hands are free and you can capture things in situations that maybe an iPhone would actually be harder to do. But yeah, most of the time, yeah, you're right, the iPhone's the tool for this job.
Yeah. I'm also very curious about the role of the shooter's perspective in this video capture.
Yeah.
Because last night I shot video of my dog sleeping for 30 seconds because his little paws were wiggling.
Right.
And I shot that from essentially couch level, like my own thighs.
Yes.
And like that's a weird perspective if I'm looking at it in 3D, because that would mean that I'm like squatting.
Yes.
And is a video shot by a very tall person in a headset very different than a video shot by a very short person? It's like, I don't know what to make of that yet.
No. Yeah, and that'll be interesting to play around with once the headset comes out to try to what's the different experiences, like how you'll need to learn, like how is it, what are the best practices for shooting spatial video? You probably don't want to be doing anything too jarring, just like slow movements and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I'll be intrigued about future developments in that format as well, because we've come pretty far just on JPEGs, and then all this like the HEIF sidecar data with live photos and depth maps and all that stuff. So I don't know what this format is that they're shooting in, but they've got freedom to explore and add stuff before it gets like codified by the IEEE.
Yeah, and I'm super curious next year when this rolls out if people will figure out ways to convert existing 3D footage into Apple's format. 'Cause I have no idea where the originals are. I've got some old GoPro footage I shot in 3D back like a decade ago. During the 3D craze.
Actually, you know what I'd be super, super interested in seeing is digitizing old Viewmasters and those old things that they had in the Nickelodeons, the 3D things. They have some in Disneyland. There's very old machines you put a dime in and look through. Right. And it was shot in 3D, but like 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Being able to travel back in time in 3D like that would be really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine the people that have that stuff, if they can figure that out, that'd be a cool app to just sell, this 3D content.
Yeah. There's definitely a market for just 3D content as a service.
Yes, for sure.
3D modelers, 3D artists will be very busy for the foreseeable future.
This episode is sponsored by Agenda. In this quick break, I want to share a bit about Agenda's big multi-window update that happened earlier this year for both the Mac and the iPad, and is now very useful with Stage Manager on the iPad finally being in a happy place. These changes will also shine on the Apple Vision Pro, with that OS being so perfect for working with multiple windows. So before we get to all of these awesome new multi-window additions to the app, I want to make sure everyone knows about the new ability to navigate Agenda very quickly with just the keyboard. By hitting Option Space, you are now brought into a quick search box that by just searching for the name of the note or project, you can either hit Enter to open the first result or arrow down to the result you want to open, hit Enter to open that note or project. It's super fast and is just so nice not needing to use the trackpad or touch the screen to jump to the note or project you want to work in next. So, the huge thing added earlier this year was true multi-window support for both the iPad and the Mac. Every note now has a little window icon. You'll find this next to the gear icon at the bottom of every note. On iPad, this button behaves a bit differently if you are in split screen mode versus Stage Manager. In split screen, it'll bring that window front and center and dim the background. The same behavior you'll find in Apple's Mail app. This is an awesome way to work if you do just want to focus on your single note, and is the mode I work in when I'm writing up scripts in what I call iPad mode. of allowing more focus than other environments provide. Just like in Apple Mail, you can manipulate this window with the triple dots on the top of the window, allowing you to transform that window into a slide over window or use it in split screen. At any time, you can tap the icon on the bottom of the note to return the note to the main agenda window where you started. If you are working in Stage Manager, hitting that window button will pop that note out as a brand new window that you can move and resize however you want. The sidebars of agenda are hidden, but if you want to use that window for a different note, you can slide out the sidebars to move away from that note. Just like working in split screen mode, you can tap the window button on the bottom of that Stage Manager window to bring that note back into your original window you were working in. It's a very well thought out system for using multiple windows in Agenda on the iPad and the Mac, and something for sure worth trying out if you haven't already. And I can't wait to try this experience on visionOS, as that OS just screams multi-window and having a bunch of different windows scattered throughout your environment. So those are just a few new things worth checking out if you haven't already in Agenda. If you haven't tried Agenda, I'd really encourage you to give it a try. Agenda is free to download to use with no obtrusive ads. To unlock the full power of Agenda, give Agenda Premium a shot. One thing that Agenda continues to do that I love is their approach to the premium features and unlocks. If you ever decide to cancel your Agenda Premium subscription, you get to keep all of the premium features available when you are a subscriber, or you can now opt for their new lifetime unlock, which will unlock the full power of Agenda on all your Apple devices, including Apple Vision Pro, when that launches next year, with a single one-time purchase. To learn more, go to agenda.com. Download Agenda 18 today for free from the App Store. My thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of Vision Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com.
So, give me an elevator pitch for your app that is soon to be released at some point for Apple platforms, including visionOS, when that comes out early next year.
Sure. My app is called Symbolsaurus, and it is a thesaurus of iconography. For anyone who's never used the SF Symbols icon set, it's a library that Apple publishes of thousands and thousands of icons. And designers and developers can use them instead of drawing new icons from scratch, which is labor intensive. And if you've drawn one plus icon, you've drawn a million. Like no one should draw that icon ever again.
Yeah, these are things like the pause icon in like video players. Every imaginable thing.
Yes. Yeah, it's 7,000 or 8,000 of them right now. They just keep adding like 1,000 every year, and they've been going for a while. And the icons are all named something like xmark.circle.fill. They're named like with unique identifiers because you need to be able to call them from code.
Yeah.
And they don't have any specific meaning. They just describe the shape. And I think that's a philosophical stance on their part, because xmark.circle.fill like is very often a close button. You've seen it used as a close button 100 times. But it's also a cancel button or a clear button. Like the semantics are flexible. And so they're not prescribing a name for what this symbol should be used as. And they're very cagey about that. They have some metadata in there. So if you search in Apple's official app, if you search the word share, you will get the arrow up square icon, which would otherwise it would be impossible to find the share icon that we all use in every app. Yeah, because it's called like arrow.up.square or something. And so I manually collect all these real world labels, all this semantics, and make it all searchable and all cross-referenced. So like a dictionary, like a thesaurus, which is where the name comes from, obviously, I've compiled all this stuff into a reference tool. And so if you need a toolbar icon for an edit button, you can just find one, and it's real world examples, and I'll tell you where they all came from so you can judge for yourself and pick one with some confidence.
Yeah, like in the close example, you have examples of it used for dismiss, cancel, close, and clear, and all the examples you may find in this app. And you do tap into some third-party apps as examples. I notice Overcast as an example. As far as third-party apps, is the data there from just personal knowledge, or is there some is there some way to easily find where this stuff is being used?
Not easily. Definitely looked. No, this is a manual process. So it's I every week or so just sit down for a few hours and just pour through some apps, try and find every screen, try and find every context menu on iPad, try and find every single use of an icon. And with a combination of accessibility tools, like on the Mac, VoiceOver has a mode where you just hover on stuff and it shows you the accessibility description. So you don't have to navigate via VoiceOver like you would on iPad.
Yeah.
So that the hover to reveal what the label for an icon is very helpful to me. And obviously all context menus on iPadOS, they have a label and an icon. So that's very easy mapping.
Right.
But I'm just doing it manually because this is literally what I've always done in my career. It's like, I need to label this heart icon. Like, what do we call it? Do we call it favorite? Do we call it like? Do we call it love? Like, this is a normal part of the job. And I think just kind of collecting all this stuff together, painstaking work as it may be, like, just saves everyone a ton of time.
Yeah. So an inspiration for this app, it sounds like from personal need. You said this is something that you, as a designer, need these symbols, and up until now, it's been pretty archaic as far as trying to find the right ones and implement them.
Yeah. And in my career, I've been very fortunate to work on a lot of 0 to 1, like product design or product redesign from scratch, where you're just like, all right, let's reset assumptions. And so if you're working on a much older app, meanings are fairly set. You don't want to upset the apple cart by changing things needlessly under customers, by changing icons or changing the meaning of things. But for new products, or like I said, a lot of what I do nowadays is prototyping. It's all brand new and it all has to be pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so finding the right icon or finding the right label for the icon fairly quickly it's a big need for me, and it always has been. But I also studied linguistics in school, and so that's just part of what you do. Like, if you become a professional linguist, it becomes your job to document the real world usage of language. That's the job. And so it's funny to me that this is all like colliding in my career now.
Yeah.
But iconography is super hard. Like, drawing icons is super hard. That's literally semiotics as a job. And on a design team, button labels are usually called microcopy, and there usually isn't a dedicated micro copywriter. Like, it just kind of falls to the designer to write something that makes sense very often, unless you're at a big company. So, a tool that surfaces good icons, good microcopy, gives you some confidence. That's valuable to me.
So when you find the icon you want to use in Symbolsaurus, is it as easy as hitting Command C to have that in your clipboard to paste it into wherever it needs to go, or
Yep.
Yeah.
And in code, or if you're working with engineers, you need to give them that unique identifier.
Okay.
And so you need to be able to copy that. And if you're using something like Figma or Sketch, where you want to paste the icon itself into the thing that you're drawing, you want to copy that. And I've got that as an alternate keyboard shortcut, or in the context menu, because in a weird turn of events, Apple also publishes all of these icons in their SF font, the San Francisco Pro font family.
Okay.
They're added to the font as characters, like
so you could paste it into
far
pages
distant
and resize it as a text thing.
Yeah, they're like non-standard emoji.
Okay.
They're just in there.
Yeah.
Which it is limiting because you have to have the font to do that. But with print to PDF, or just taking screenshots, that's not a limitation on sharing that with the people who need to see it, like managers or whatever. But for tools like Sketch and Figma, you can just copy and paste that character into your design, and it's there. And you can make it bold, or you can make it bigger or smaller, and you're not losing any fidelity.
Is this font built into all the Apple platforms, or do you have to go out and download it to add it to, say, your iPad?
To use it for copy and paste, you have to download it, which is a bit of a bummer.
Okay.
The system, when you're using them in apps, the system does it through a totally different mechanism.
Okay.
Through some APIs for calling images out of text.
Yeah.
Because they, for buttons and stuff, you're typically using these as images.
It's in code.
They're not like
in that example.
Yeah. So the font is an optional download, and it's pretty much only possible to install on a Mac. So that's a big limiting factor.
Oh, you cannot install this on an iOS device. There's even, yeah.
I have heard of someone trying to install it through like the old iTunes vector. I don't even know if that's possible anymore, but like without any luck.
That's such a weird. How big is this font? Is this some like ginormous?
There are a few meg. I was recently using these fonts in a PDF, and I used a few different weights of the font, and every weight of a font, whether it's bold or regular or thin, is a whole separate font file.
Right.
And so that when I went to print the PDF of this document, it was like a 5 megabyte document or a 5 megabyte PDF, because PDF embeds the font inside of the PDF file. And so it's like, oh, I can't send someone a 5 megabyte PDF just because I like the font.
Right.
In
the Mac version of this app, is there going to be like a way to walk people through installing these fonts on that Mac?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Because one of the weirder parts is if you're running a beta operating system, those symbols are available to you, like that year's symbols, because they publish new ones every year, just like emoji.
Right.
So if you're running a beta operating system, those symbols are available to you in code, but they're not available to you to copy and paste from the font until Apple releases a new version of the font. So there's certainly on the Mac app, I have a ton of different paths for just alerting you that it's like, you're not going to have a good time if you try and copy this particular symbol today. Maybe wait a few months.
Yeah. So, apps to use these, of course. What other kind of use cases and different projects are SF symbols used in? Like, are web pages starting to use these now? Is it, or where else do we see these?
So Apple's licensing is pretty restrictive.
Okay.
I haven't seen, and I should read it more closely. I should take a magnifying glass to that license agreement to see if you're allowed to subset the font. But all of the web tools that I've seen are very circumspect about embedding the font in the web page. They just kind of they'll put the glyph on the page, and if you have the font installed, then great, you'll see it. But if you don't, then you just get the old question mark box.
So web design, not so much right now.
Not so much, yeah. So very much just like things that are local to your computer, and then Apple's family of platforms for app design.
Okay.
And there are certainly possibilities, like you are allowed to export and modify these, and some of them have very specific trademarks on them. Like you're not allowed to export and modify the AirPlay symbol. That's just AirPlay is an Apple trademark. Yes. They don't want you to do that. You're not allowed to export and modify the Xbox logo for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So Apple obviously has an agreement with Microsoft to include the Xbox logo, so long as they don't let people mess with it.
That's fascinating. The Xbox logo is a part of SF symbols. That's a thing.
I think that's because of third-party controller support.
Oh,
because
did Sony and Nintendo have their logos in there as well? Probably.
I don't know if I've seen the Nintendo logo, but Sony, yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I know the Joy-Cons are now supported finally.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
But yeah. So it's like they are ultimately images, and so they can ultimately be exported in any image format. But I've been holding off on that, obviously, just to try and hit a 1.0 ship date.
Yeah.
And because I really need to look at that license agreement to make sure I'm not going to get in trouble for doing it.
So this app started life before visionOS was a thing, correct?
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah. It actually started as a macOS app.
Okay. Which makes sense with the font being there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, Xcode, Figma, Sketch, all these tools that developers and designers are using every single day are on the Mac.
Right.
And so that, for the longest time for me, was the primary interface.
Yeah.
And then because I spend so much time prototyping and sketching on my iPad, then I was like, well, I need an iPad app. Otherwise, I'm just have to go and open my Mac to look up a symbol.
Right.
And so I added iPad support. And then, if you make an iPad window small enough, it is essentially an iPhone app.
Might as well
add iPhone support. And so it just kind of snowballed from there. And then
did the app
when
Apple
visionOS
Watch
was
get might
announced
as well yet?
I'm tempted by Apple Watch and tvOS, but I'm like at least smart enough to not jump on that for 1.0.
Yes, very smart. Yes. So, what design considerations did you have to rethink with Apple Vision Pro and visionOS? Is there something that you initially thought, oh, this should work pretty well, migrating my iPad app over here, and then and not so much?
Well, so we talked about how earlier, like visionOS apps are very, very similar. They're definitely cut from the same cloth as iPad apps.
Yeah.
And so thankfully not a bottom-up redesign. Like I didn't have to like throw out a ton of stuff. But in some ways, visionOS is more like macOS. Like we're talking about buttons being too attention-grabbing on iPadOS, because iPadOS comes with the assumption of running full screen. Like most apps are run full screen, and like Stage Manager is a very niche use case. Mm-hmm. But macOS and visionOS, you come with the assumption of multitasking. You are going to be one window of many. And there is such a thing as standing out for the wrong reasons in that environment. Yeah. So I think there will be some toning down of design from a lot of apps for visionOS. And I've done a little bit of that, like, toolbar buttons that were hot pink. I'm like, oh, that's jarring. And so, I think if you look at a lot of the visionOS apps in the keynote and on the website and stuff, like everything is pretty monochrome because there's just a lot of color in your environment that's coming through. Yeah. And you need to contrast with that. So like really they're just like, white is the contrast color. That is pretty much just what visionOS is all about. The foreground is white because there's no dark mode. It's always just kind of like adaptive. Yeah.
And we have not really seen from Apple's material what using Vision Pro in the pitch black will be like with those cameras and how will those perform and conveying your surroundings.
Yeah. I mean, it has LiDAR, but I also just have no idea what LiDAR does in an environment if there's many Vision Pros all like shooting LiDAR over the room. Right, I don't understand how any of this works under the hood because it's not my area. Right. But, besides like toning down your buttons and like trying to be a good multitasking citizen, there's something, if I can like embarrass myself as a developer, I was talking about how macOS was the primary interface. Like that is, it's where I expect most people to use the app. And that means like the iPad and then the iPhone are like secondary and tertiary, and they were like derivative interfaces. Yeah. And, simplified or at least made like correct to their platform idiom, but not like radically rethought because I'm one person and I'm trying to ship an app on 3 platforms. Using visionOS and seeing how much it has in common with iPadOS, it's like, oh, okay, now macOS is starting to be outnumbered. And I personally consider visionOS to be a primary like productivity platform. I plan to use Xcode and Figma in visionOS because I plan to just be using my Mac at the kitchen counter through Vision Pro.
Yeah, so the interesting use case is, so Xcode will run on the Mac, and in visionOS, you just get one window for that Mac with version 1 of this iteration, at least with version 1.0 of the software. So it highly encourages your Mac to be running a full screen app, in my mind, in this case Xcode, and then Symbolsaurus being a different full screen app running in visionOS. And I'd imagine copy and paste between all the platforms will work as it does with Mac to iPad with the universal clipboard. So I'd imagine, we'll be using some productivity apps within visionOS that talk to the Mac in cool ways.
Yeah. So it kind of like, to my mind, it makes visionOS a primary platform, and iPadOS, because it has so much in common, is thus also a primary platform. And now it's like, all right, is macOS a legacy platform now? Am I rethinking this entire app based on iPadOS idiom? And I'm like, and I did. I sat down and I was like, okay, I've made all these design decisions based on macOS idiom, and I'm going to throw them out because doing it this other way feels much better on iPad. Yeah. And so it will also feel much better on Vision, and that's what I want. And so I'm in the process of just redesigning huge chunks of the app just because of that like mental shift that I've made.
Mm-hmm.
And now that means adapting the Mac UI from the iPad UI instead of the other way around.
Yeah. Are the SF symbols available in any kind of three-dimensional format, or have you considered some way of lifting the symbols off the screen slightly to be like, fake 3D almost?
They aren't, and a lot of them would do poorly.
Okay.
At that, I've thought about it. I've seen some efforts. I think Steve Troughton-Smith again at like extruding shapes, like taking a 2D shape and making it pseudo 3D.
Yeah.
Because visionOS apps, like if you go side on, they're not even paper thin. They are non-existent side on, and so there's something about making it a little 3D that's interesting. But I'm also like, I've used plenty of font management apps over the years that like let you explore all the characters in a font, and then they're like, what if we rendered it in brass? What if we made it? And I understand if you're someone who sells like door numbers for a living, that you do actually want to see things extruded in brass,
right?
Because that's what you're selling. I'm not 100% sure that's necessary for vision, for symbols.
Yeah, it'd be fun if you integrate these symbols with like I'm designing a VCR and I can lift the play button off the Symbolsaurus and drag it into my fake VCR I'm making. I better not get in trouble for this. Fun fact about Apple Campus is they just use symbols everywhere. They're SF symbols on their trash cans and on their recycle bins and on their elevator buttons. Restrooms,
they're just like,
I'd imagine,
yeah, they're just like, why would we draw this again when we have all of these icons at our disposal? And you're seeing that more and more in dub presentations as well.
Right.
Like a lot of people giving presentations are like, man, I would have had to like ask someone to draw me a thing, but now I'll just dig up a totally new one.
Definitely. Designing your app. You mentioned the iPad is kind of the best way to be designing now. If it feels good there, it's going to feel good in visionOS. Does it just feel roomier in visionOS from what you've seen in WWDC videos?
Yeah, I mean, I think roominess feels relative to the space that you're constrained in. Like, I don't open a lot of windows on my iPad.
Yeah,
unless I'm actively multitasking, because the screen just gets full really quickly and it feels cramped. But if you're doing what our multitasking friend did in the keynote, and you have 4 windows just kind of like arrayed around you, and like the music app is off to your left, it's not even in your peripheral vision, you have to turn your head. It's like, cool, you like most of your day you're not even looking at the music app, but it's there, and you can just turn your head at any time. It's like that's roomy, because you're really just looking at what you want to look at without a lot of stuff just in the periphery.
Yeah. As far as current functionality in your app, you mentioned some of what's there. Is there anything you haven't mentioned yet as far as what's there, and as far as additional features, anything you hope to add for launch, or is it just a matter of kind of polishing up the current UI to be able to ship it?
Well, I mean, besides that major undertaking of redesigning the UI.
Yeah, as far as
this app is
that little thing,
This app is feature complete. It's been on test flight for a while. Like, if I was smarter, I would just ship it. But I am instead like undertaking this major renovation. But it's there's functionality built in that is very much geared towards developers, because that is the target market. And it's, if you see a symbol and you like it and you want to use it, but your app is targeting iOS 14 and greater, and this symbol was published in iOS 15, you need to know about that.
Definitely.
So I have, like, right now I show the date of release and let you also look at, what that corresponds to for different platforms, because a symbol that came out technically in September of 2023, it isn't. Oh wait, it is out yet for Sonoma. Never mind.
Yeah.
So let's talk about last year.
Right.
September of 2022, symbols that came out for iOS 16 didn't hit macOS for another month, and so there's that entire mapping of releases to OS versions to dates that is like weird and interesting.
Is there going to be a filter to like filter out, I just want stuff from this point forwards?
Yeah. And so I have, it's funny, there's there's a whole treasure trove of features that I've just kind of like hidden because I want to ship instead. It's like as soon as 1.0 ships, then I can unhide those features and make sure they're good, and then ship a 1.1, and that'll almost certainly be before Vision Pro.
Yeah.
But things like that version filter where you're like, I am targeting iOS 13. Only show me symbols from iOS 13 and earlier. Like that's critical to like anybody working on an app that's been around for more than 5 minutes.
Yeah. For Mac
and things like previewing it in your company's colors, which is, if you've worked on an app and your app is tinted to the company colors, that's what you're looking at all day. And you just kind of want to see it previewed that way.
Yeah.
Things like that, where it's just like little quality of life features for designers and developers.
As far as input in visionOS, I'd imagine you have to design this app with the expectation that they may not even have a keyboard or mouse in front of them, entirely hand and eye. But also, most of them probably will also have a keyboard and mouse because they're working in Xcode alongside this. And how do you design with that in mind, input versatility?
That feels a lot like iPadOS, really.
Right.
It's interesting because a lot of apps, mine included, the input, especially text input, is really limited. Like it's a search field.
Right.
There are some other fields for text input, but this is not an app for composing text the way that Xcode is or IA Writer or any of these apps where you would expect to use a hardware keyboard. Because I really use my hardware keyboard a lot because I'm either writing text or I'm writing code. And going back to our conversation about gestures earlier, design tools use keyboard very heavily, even though you think of like designing is a very mouse-heavy process or stylus-heavy process. The number of keyboard modifiers, the number of keyboard shortcuts that you have to use just to get any work done at all in design tools is kind of horrifying. There's an old joke about the Photoshop save for web claw. You have to like contort your hand into a horrible little claw in order to press the 6 buttons in order to save for web. And, everybody gets RSI eventually.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, actually, like I said about ergonomics earlier, very excited about this platform that it could solve a lot of that. But I'm certainly going to bring my keyboard to it to start with, just because that's the habit I've formed. I'm a keyboard person.
Yeah.
And maybe I can switch to a split keyboard, or like, can you buy trousers with keyboards in the legs or something?
Right.
There's got to be something there that makes it a little better. But I'm really curious how text input will evolve over time, because programming is heavily keyboard bound, as I said. But like, can you have like a multi-finger midair swipe keyboard? Like if you're using all 10 fingers, can you just type out a word just by doing like casting a magic spell? Can I dictate at whispering volume, or do I have to be enunciating loudly the way that I feel like I have to do with Siri?
Yeah.
It seems like there's so much potential here. Like, and earlier we were talking about gestures. Like, I want to be able to just like, I don't know, like flick my thumb and have a backspace or an undo.
Yeah.
Like there's so much potential for fluency that doesn't rely on a keyboard. And I'm just like, I'm waiting for it, because it's like they haven't shown it. And we know what the standard gestures are because they published them.
Right.
And we're waiting on like that next level, that next level, which could honestly be 5 years in the making.
Yeah. So iPadOS is very constrained to a single window. You can do multiple windows, but it's really not doesn't shine there. visionOS, on the other hand, you got all the room in the world, multiple windows, these ornamental windows for your apps. What are your thoughts on having, pop-out windows to your app? Does it make sense in this case, or does it make best sense as a single floating window?
I mean, I think this platform is geared towards power users, and I think like maybe it's a gimmick, maybe it's something to do with eye tracking, but the ornaments and stuff that are in different depth planes, there's something there that's probably has a good explanation and they're not telling us. Yeah. But I think that it's nice and it's interesting that they can say, oh, we're not bound by the rectangle anymore. Right. If it doesn't have to be in the rectangle, then don't put it in the rectangle. But I think visionOS is as suited to multi-window stuff as macOS ever was, which makes me happy because it is a power user platform. But even saying that, like, there's been a clear trend on macOS away from floating panes into like contained sidebars and things like, I don't even know if there were such things as photo viewers back in the day, but you probably just looked at your Finder window and clicked on a photo in Finder and opened it in a new window to look at it in a new window.
Occasionally you'd hit the space bar to play it as Quick Look or whatever.
Yeah. And Quick Look is, like, relatively speaking, young. But things like,
I was just thinking,
like the Photos app.
I was just thinking CoverFlow as a very horizontal window floating above your entire space in a 3D way could be a lot of fun in visionOS.
Oh, yeah. Like, I mean, we said, they're obviously being very conservative about what they ship in 1.0, but like the space management that they have to be playing with to ship like 3 or 4 years from now has got to be something really interesting. Because I want to save a certain number of windows in a certain configuration and pull them out of my hat.
Yeah.
Like I essentially want spaces, like the macOS version of spaces. I want it in virtual space. Yeah. But for now, like, I'll be happy to work from my living room and just like leave some windows over by the couch and leave a different set of windows over by the kitchen table. And I'll just physically move if I need to use different apps. Yeah. But there's got to be something interesting they're working on for space management.
Yeah. I can't imagine developers making use of these very narrow, wide app windows that just would not make sense in any other platform. I think that could be pretty interesting. Yeah.
I think multi-window from a single app's perspective is welcome, even though iPadOS clearly dissuades you from it. Like, it's possible on iPadOS, but
you don't see
it's crowded
palettes very often on iPadOS.
And visionOS design guidelines actually warn against doing too much with too many windows because it can apparently feel crowded. And I don't think designers have ever like put a great deal of effort into making sure things don't feel claustrophobic before, but now that's a legitimate concern,
right?
That your user interface could actually cause people distress. So that's on the designer's head.
Yeah, you have to look at all the phobias, make sure your app doesn't the spider phobia or whatever, the hole phobia.
The too many small holes.
Yeah.
But I think as a user, the freedom to open multiple windows is more than welcome.
Yeah.
Like, I certainly have already put like an open a new window button in my context windows because why not?
Right.
And I don't use that context. I don't use that button on iPadOS. I've never felt the need.
Yeah.
But in visionOS, if I can open something in a little window and then throw it onto the other side of the room for safekeeping, then I will.
Yeah. That'd be kind of funny if your filing cabinets in the real world, you just open one up that's empty. You just put windows in there for safekeeping for later that you can pull out. I was just thinking about that.
Or you like program the action button on your phone to like switch between different windows in your visionOS.
Right. Yeah, there should totally be some kind of action button integration with visionOS. Maybe it's from the watch would make more sense there in some ways.
I mean, part of me wants to, but knows that this is a zero margin business and that like you really struggle to make any money in. But I want to make Bluetooth accessories where it's just like, like how guitars come, you can buy stomp boxes that add effects to your guitar output. It's like, I just want stomp boxes all around. When I step on it, it just talks to my device and triggers something.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And the closest we've got is like weird HomeKit buttons that like go through my IKEA hub to do weird stuff.
Yeah, because they make Bluetooth pedals that talk to iPad where you can change your pages and stuff. So I wonder how far that stuff could go.
I just want buttons everywhere.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking of, collections, like as you're working on different projects, probably not on version 1, but version 2, I'd imagine, favoriting certain things for certain collections of icons you're working with for different projects.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, okay, that's a great feature, but I would want it to sync, which means I need to like look into CloudKit. So like, let's just put that on the back burner.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, you look at the scope balloon and then you're like, oh, okay, not today.
Yes. Anything else about Symbolsaurus before we move on?
no, I mean, I'm kicking myself for this like major renovation that I'm doing in it. I should just ship it already, but no, I'm happy to like get it right. Yeah. It is one of those things which is definitely a curse, because I have a lot of friends who have a much smarter view of shipping software, where they're just like, all right, let's build a concept and ship it, and if it has any traction at all, then it's got legs, and let's work on it more. Yeah. And I'm just like, no, I already know that I want this, and I already prototyped it for myself, right. And I know that it has legs, and I know it has legs for myself. So I'm just going to sit here and polish it for a good long time before I put it out in the world. And maybe that's a side effect of working in so many hardware companies, where it's like the development time for hardware is so long that you are given the liberty of years to work on the software that goes with that hardware.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know that people are mostly not updating the software on those hardware devices. So you want to get it right out of the box. Yeah. So there's some brain damage I've taken from working in hardware startups that is now leaking into my software life.
Yeah. So we've already chatted a bit about, CAD apps and other things like that. Any visionOS apps you hope get created by either yourself or someone else one day soon?
Yeah. Actually, if anyone listening has millions of dollars, please hit me up and I'll hire a team to work on this, because this is not for me. I think it would just be so cool that, how a lot of movies, almost all action movies nowadays, are just shot entirely on green screen with the little tracking balls, and then they're composited with background plates. Mm-hmm. And in the old days, like in the Star Wars original trilogy, those backgrounds were all hand painted. Yeah. But now they're 3D models. Mm-hmm. And I assume the job of a set designer in this world is just more difficult than it needs to be.
Yeah.
This is like, you're not just a set designer, you're a 3D artist. Huh. Or those are now two totally different jobs. Mm-hmm. That like there are set designers who literally go thrifting for cool old objects and put them on a shelf for when they need a physical set. And there are 3D artists who do something entirely different, and they don't go thrifting, or maybe they do just for inspiration. Yeah. But I think an AR tool for virtual set design, or just virtual interior design, would be incredibly fun. Just having this Mary Poppins bag full of furniture and books and art and tchotchkes to just put in a virtual space and see how it feels. I think that would be so fun. I'm a habitual furniture rearranger, so that's coming into it here. But like rearranging furniture with your eyes and repainting with the snap of a finger, and like not having to drill holes to hang a new piece of art. Yeah. Like this is, I spent the last few weekends changing out light fixtures and stuff around the house. Yeah. So it's, I'm feeling it right now, moving furniture and standing on ladders. And it's like, it sounds fun to me, and it also sounds really useful to a very specific industry. And so I think that would be incredible to work on.
Yeah, that'd be super cool. And it'd be amazing if, integrate it with Final Cut Pro and the other video editors and whatever they use to compile.
And the gestures.
Stuff. Yes.
The infinite gestures you could invent for that workflow.
Yeah, that'd be cool. A lot of sets are indoors. Some stuff is outdoors. I'm curious how that, as we've talked about earlier, how outdoors will behave. Yeah. Any final thoughts regarding spatial computing before we wrap it up? Yeah.
We talked a bit earlier about like 3D objects as things that you might want to subscribe to, like a feed of. I'm just like, I know that they demoed that dinosaur thing, but it's like there are so many more things and places in the world that are not safe for me to go or not safe for me to be near that I want to. Yeah. And it's like, all right, if nature documentaries can all be shot in 3D, I'll be a happy camper. Or if like some 3D artists just produce like a life-size grizzly bear model that I can like stand near, because I've only ever stood 60 feet from a grizzly bear at a zoo. Yes. And I'm not getting any closer. And I've never stood on the edge of a volcano. There are all these things that I will never do that I would love to see up close. And I think there's that's another one of those ideas that is gated entirely by if people can make 3D objects for it. Yeah. But there is so much to see in a virtual world because of the constraints of the real world that don't let us poke at blue whales in the flesh.
The Horizon Call the Mountain it really you start the game in this boat ride with these monster machines jumping over you, and it the sense of immersion is there. It really is. I can't wait to experience stuff like that in Apple Vision Pro, and National Geographic being owned by Disney. Perhaps they will do some cool stuff with that, hopefully.
Yeah. Now you're encouraging me to buy a PSVR 2.
Totally should. It has eye tracking, so you can play around with how that all works in some of the games.
I held off because the only game I was really interested in playing was Moss, and I've already played Moss. I just wanted to play it in higher res.
You mentioned you are not a racer, but Gran Turismo, you will want to then buy a racing wheel, which is an incredible experience in that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Expensive hobbies then.
Yes. It's a rabbit hole. It's a fun one. Well, yeah, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really fun chat. I really enjoyed learning more about.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find you on the interwebs, and when your app launches, where should people look out for that?
I am at Clarko on mastodon.social and on too many other social medias to bother with, but I'm really only paying attention to Mastodon. Yes. It feels like the Twitter of 2012. So it's a safe place for dorks.
Yeah.
And that is where I'll be posting about Symbolsaurus and any future projects.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Well, that's my discussion with Clarko. My thanks to Clarko for his time recording, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. And finally, my thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode. Learn more at www.agenda.com. and download the app today for free from the App Store to get started. With that, I'll talk to everyone again next month for another episode of Vision Pros.